Guys, well, welcome back to another episode of the Packaging Experience. And with me always, Tom, how are you?
I'm doing great. How are you doing, Jeff?
I'm doing pretty good. So you are in California now. Welcome back.
Yeah, I got in on Sunday, so it's nice to be back and escape the gross heat of Florida and be in a place that's actually requiring a quarter zip in August. It's crazy.
Yeah. Yeah, you came in at a perfect time where it's about foggy. It's about to be sunny all week. So it's really nice here in California. I'm very excited for that time just because it's always cloudy where we're at. So it's nice to have some sun every now and then. So
No doubt for sure.
Well, today's topic is one of a kind. As you know, something that we've talked about in our previous podcast leading up until today, of course, is PFAS, known as polyfluoroalkyl. It's a substance. A lot of you guys probably know about it. It is not something that should be taken lightly, and it's also known as forever chemical. So Tom and I are going to be going over a little bit deep diving into where it comes from, what it does, how to stay away from it. This is not going to scare you. This is not to scare you. This is to enlighten you, inform you, and to help you just understand what it is, how to avoid it, and how to keep moving forward. Whether you're a consumer or work in the packaging industry, this is something you need to be aware of. So grab a coffee, sit back, and let's get into it.
Yeah, so jumping right into it, Jeff, you did quite a bit of research on PFAS leading up to this podcast. So I kind of want to hear your thoughts on what it is, how it works, and we'll go from there.
Well, originally it's from the 1940s, which is crazy because they actually created these types of chemicals to go into certain bombs and stuff like that. So already an alarming situation, right? I mean, that's the first thing that I really look at or I even understand whenever I'm reading something is like, wow, we really have something that we use for atomic bombs, we use for certain metals, and now we're using it in factories, which is now leading into our oceans. And then we're using those ocean water to help with the crops. And it's just a vicious cycle right now. So very problematic. And that's why we're here today is to kind of, again, help you kind of tiptoe around this and get a better understanding of what it really is. And again, how to avoid it completely. And especially nowadays, I believe from in the next year or so, it should be almost completely removed, which is amazing. I mean, that's all we could really ask for is that once we discover a certain chemical that is dangerous to society, to the planet, that we try to find a way to make it better, try to find a way to avoid it. And that's exactly what we're doing. So again, it's a study. And again, it's Google for the most part, but where they were kind of going with that is, they're in hopes that by 2025, it should be completely removed. And I think that is a huge change of direction. So
are you saying remove from like our groundwater supply, or are you saying remove from packaging?
So both. They're basically, I mean, the biggest aspect is we're trying to move it from the soil. They're doing a lot of interchanging. They're finding ways to kind of excavate the top of things. They're finding ways to test the oceans. And in that case, if they can find it in the oceans, they can actually remove it through certain chemicals that are proper for the ocean, that are safe for the fish, safe for the animals around it, the mammals, everything, even the humans. So yeah, that's kind of whenever I was reading, I was like very excited. It's good news,
Yeah. And I think it's important to understand that we don't need to throw the baby out with the bathwater, meaning PFAS is a chemical family, and I think there's like 5,000 or 7,000 chemicals that fall into that family. And just like in any family, some are more toxic than others, right? So, just because there might be some sort of PFAS in there, I don't want you to think that there's a cancer-causing agent in there. But there are versions of this PFAS or elements in this PFAS chemical family that are really bad. And what they are is tiny molecule chains, and your body can't break them down. So if you build up a certain amount of them in your body, then it usually becomes a carcinogen of some sort leading to cancer, right? So that's what we're trying to avoid. We don't want anybody to get cancer. But to your point, we have to kind of unring a bell because it's kind of gone under the radar for a long time. And it's in our groundwater supply. It's in our topsoil. It's in a lot of places that we don't want it to be. Actually, don't you have a map or something where we can track that, Jeff?
Yeah. So in this video, I'll end in the description, I'm going to post a link. And in that link, you were able to click on it, search your location, and kind of find how much of it is in your area. And Tom already kind of did his part in looking in his area in Florida, here in California. But yes, I will have that link for you. It's a great read. It also has some case studies in there as well, which I am a very big fan of, because when you're looking at information like this, you always want to have a very important source. You want to make sure that it's valid and they're not fear mongering you, because that's the biggest thing about anything in this world. You just want to make sure that's true. So,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah. So I think we covered kind of what PFAS is. You know, it's a chemical family. It's used in a lot of, I think the most famous case, and I think there's a movie on Netflix starring Mark Ruffalo, but it's about Teflon, because typically PFAS is used like for non-stick or like a processing aid. I know it's used also in firefighting gear, I think, as well. It's got some heat resistance. I'm not
And
exactly
the
sure
foam.
what they're using it in the foam. Correct.
Yeah.
But in packaging, we use it when we extrude plastic. So there'll be a certain element or part of PFAS in there so that when we're blowing these films, these big bubbles of polyethylene or what have you, it goes through the extrusion process easier for us. But we are adding PFAS as a processing agent. And like I kind of mentioned before, is a lot of different brands are saying we don't want any additional PFAS in there. So let me kind of take a pause and say we were adding PFAS as a processing aid. A lot of it is processed out during our processing. So even before, when we were using PFAS films or PFAS added films, the actual parts per million was like 45 or 30, maybe 20, where the threshold in film for it to be considered dangerous is 100 parts per million. So we weren't, even before we started pulling PFAS out, we weren't putting a dangerous amount in there. But the spec is don't additionally add PFAS. So that's why we were using it. And some digital inks, I believe, were using PFAS as well, because you have to transfer ink from like a blanket to a substrate. So there's PFAS maybe on the blanket, so the ink doesn't stick to the blanket and transfers over to your flex pack film. I've seen that in digital inks as well. So again, if you don't want something to stick to it, it's a great idea to use PFAS, that chemistry family, as long as you're using the safe ones. That's kind of where it is. There's kind of I kind of feel like they're not going to differentiate between the good and the bad, and they are going to just say no additional PFAS. I don't care what version or what type of PFAS in that 7,000 chemical family you're using. We don't want any parts of it, because maybe we find out 10 years down the road that something that we thought was safe in that chemical family actually ends up being a carcinogen. And that's kind of, the downside of this stuff is a lot of times it takes a lot of exposure and, like you said, case studies to really figure out, oh my gosh, this is bad for us.
Trial and error, unfortunately.
Yeah. And by that time, again, it's kind of it's hard to unring that bell, right? We kind of went around to like, smoking bad for you? No. And then now all of a sudden smoking's basically non-existent, no public spaces or anything you could do that. But I mean, if you're in a really old airplane, you can still find ashtrays. And the fact that they let you smoke on an airplane ever is bananas to me. That's crazy.
Yeah.
Um,
No, that's no, I was just going to say that's, it's interesting too, but I think I had a question. You were talking about like the amount that goes into the packaging. Dive into that a little bit and kind of explain just to the person out there that's listening that may not understand the fractions part of it, but kind of dive into a little bit of how much really goes into the packaging aspect of the PFAS.
Yeah, very, very little, right? Even
Yeah.
before. So, and we've made it even less. So let me kind of explain that. Before PFAS started getting chased around, like if you're blowing polyethylene, you source from a resin supplier and you get pellets of chips, and it might have PFAS in it or might not. So, but typically what you're going to do is set up all of your extrusion lines to either run PFAS free or non-PFAS, or just standard films that might have additional PFAS as a processing aid in there. And what we're seeing are flex pack plants across the country just is like, hey, I don't want to source PFAS resin for food packaging, but if I'm doing paper towels, I'm going to use the slightly easier to run that has the additional PFAS in it. It's easier for them to buy in bulk just one type of resin. So all of these flex pack plants that are going this way are pretty much just converting to no additional PFAS added versions of their polyethylene resin pellets. And that's kind of where we see that going. Now, like right now, I think it's like Ohio, Michigan, California. There's a couple states that have it fully like banned. You cannot use this one or this one.
Yeah,
But when you look at
governments.
the direction of the country, I think it's just going to be completely banned at all states, at all levels, the entire family.
It really is. I think, like I was just kind of saying, that a lot of governments are starting to take that upper hand a little bit and start to move forward with just reducing it completely. And like we were saying at the beginning of this podcast, is they're already taking steps to removing it out, on the oceans, on our land, all that stuff. So what you're saying is absolutely right. It's eventually, hopefully, it's gone, and there's some useful tactics for it. But other than that, at the doses that they were using before was not right for sure.
No, definitely not. So where it becomes, we can't have a podcast and at least talk about sustainable, right? So even though we're talking about PFAS, what's interesting is when we talk about PCR, right? Because PCR is post-consumer resin, meaning resin that we've captured maybe from high-density polyethylene milk jugs, right? And then we rechip that down and then we make bags out of them. Those high-density polyethylene milk jugs might not be additional PFAS-free added. So what happens when you're like, hey, I want 25% PCR content? We're blowing that into non-PFAS added film, but the PCR content might have PFAS added in it, right? So that's where it gets a little bit tricky with PCR is if you're using a PCR resin, you're probably collected that from some PCR versions of some film that's going in that post-consumer resin. Now there's post-industrial resin, right? Which is when we're blowing film, we get trim loss and stuff like that. And then we repelletize it and we use it. And if we started with no additional PFAS free resin, then the PIR would actually be a safer bet if coming from a PFAS free plant than it would be PCR because we don't really know where that's coming from. So that's an interesting little dynamic. And you can blend both, right? You could do up to a 25% PCR, 25% PIR in your polyethylene blends if you want to. That's getting a little high. But the more that we can use reused resin, right, as opposed to blowing virgin resin, then we're reducing our demand to create more plastic and put it out there and into the environment. So PCR and PIR are great ways to try to create, a bit of that circular economy around polyethylene and reuse polyethylene that's already out there as opposed to blowing new plastic and creating demand for new plastic.
Yeah, absolutely. So another kind of go off of that then, if someone is listening to this and they want to kind of ask us, how are we exposed to it? Not only are we exposed to it through the food packaging, but not like you're saying, the percentage is very, very small. So you don't necessarily have to worry about that. But, how are other ways that they're exposed to it? And to me, I mean, teaching someone about this stuff is how to avoid it, So I guess I really go ahead.
I think there's three things you could do to avoid it. Number one, don't be a firefighter. Because I think in that industry, you're going to be exposed to it because I don't know if they found a replacement for it in firefighting chemicals and firefighting gear. I don't know what the steps are there. I'm ignorant, but I don't want to discourage you to become a firefighter. That's definitely a noble profession. But in the spirit of avoiding PFAS, that seems like a good way to go to not do that. Number two, check on that map that we discussed, and you can look at your drinking water. If your drinking water is high, I don't know if filtration devices will pull this out of your drinking water, or if you want to go to, and you can check probably by brand how much PFAS is in their water, and then start making your ice cubes and using all of your water from that, if you can. And then nonstick pans, man, that's the Teflon deal that I was talking about. Like nonstick pans are awesome. It's so nice to be able to easily flip an omelet, but is it worth ingesting, carcinogens in order to get a nonstick omelet pan? And that's where Teflon really came into play. And I think there was a lawsuit against DuPont. I don't know. Don't quote me on that. We have the disclaimer at the bottom, but that's another thing, and that's why they're like, don't use metal on nonstick pans because you end up scratching off that nonstick surface. And you're thinking, oh, I don't want to do that because then it's not going to be nonstick anymore. But the real reason is you don't want to scratch those PFAS chemicals off of the surface and put it into your food. Cast iron skillets are great, man. Can't go wrong with those. And they're definitely not nonstick, but use butter, use oil, use stuff to make sure your pan's not sticky. But nonstick pans are an issue for sure.
Yeah. Just don't use metal on it. Should hopefully be okay.
Even ours, we use our smallest fry pan, and we always use either plastic or wooden when we're making omelets or whatever on it. But even after a course of couple years of using it, that coating comes off, and you can tell because stuff is sticking to it, which means at some point has that come off, like when you're washing it? Is it coming off in your food? Who knows? But that's definitely the danger in nonstick pans. And maybe there are nonstick pans out there that don't use any PFAS chemistry. Maybe something we could deep dive into and kind of do a blurb on a future podcast. Like, hey, check out these brands for PFAS-free nonstick pans that are guaranteed safe.
Yeah. I mean, I love my cast iron. That's probably the number one thing that I use all the time. Every time I cook, it's either cast iron, the grill. And yeah, I don't really buy any nonstick just because of that reason. So that was a very good breakdown. Thank you for that.
Yeah, of course.
Another thing too I want to add to this is where another problematic situation comes from is whenever the ingestion part of it, what it can do to the body. Now, of course, this all depends on like your genetics, your age, um, the sex, the ethnicity, background, health issues, of course, which, of course, if you have underlying issues, this could correlate a little bit. But the biggest one that I have always come across and is thyroid function. That's another issue that individuals deal with the most with it, slow development in the children. And that's why you see people that if there's a heavy load in that MAP area, if there's a lot of that substance in there, a lot of people tend to move away from that just because they're trying to start having a family like everyone else. So another thing to look into is bone issues and behavioral changes. That's why that map that Tom and I are going to supply for you is so important, because you need to be able to see how much of it's in your area. Again, this is what this video is for, is to how to avoid it. So again, just whenever you're looking into this situation, just make sure that you're hyper aware and you just utilize the tools around you to help avoid it, remove it, etc. And another good test that I had done in the past to check to see if my material was made out of it was just to lay your shirt on the table, take a little dripper, put some water in it, and drip some water on it. And if it's like a raincoat, or if it's like a sweatshirt like myself or Tom's and the water absorbs into it, you have nothing to worry about. Versus a raincoat, you drop the water on there, or just any coat in general, or any type of material. That's how you know there's a form of PFAS in there, and you just have to be careful with that.
Yeah, it's so funny that you bring that up. Every time I get a new pair of shoes, especially if they're white, I just take Scotch Guard and I cover the crap out of my shoes with them. But Scotch Guard, is PFAS because that's the moisture barrier that it's creating. So, and then I'm sweating in those shoes. Am I wicking that into my system? I don't know, but I've got to replace some shoes because that's the downside. They're a good invention, but keeping your white shoes clean, but at the same time, it's like, well, what price are you willing to pay to have awesome white Adidas shell toe shoes?
Yeah, exactly. And that's a good point too, is like, what price are you willing to pay? Me personally, I think shoes are a good price to pay. I'm just kidding. But for the most part, I think just going in, again, just being hyper aware, understanding what you're getting yourself into, what kind of clothes you're wearing. Again, like Tom is saying, he wears these shoes. Now, is it absorbing into Tom's sweat through his feet, into his bloodstream? We don't know that per se. We're not scientists. We don't know this to the pinpoint of the chemistry needle here. But what we are saying is just be careful. And that's exactly what this podcast is about today.
Yeah, no doubt. So avoid the nonstick, and the packaging industry as a whole is doing its part to make sure that the amount of PFAS is being put out in your food packaging is completely being reduced, and it was already at a super negligible level, but we're even taking further steps to make sure that no PFAS is being introduced. And then all of our water supply companies, I'm sure, are going to start a filtration system to make sure that they're not supplying us with that. But just, again, go to that map, check out what your water supply looks like, and ask your local municipality, like, what are you doing to reduce PFAS in there? And I think we're going to be better off 5 years down the road than we are today in that regard.
Yeah. And you're right. It's going to take some time. It's going to take some effort, but doing your part is anything this world can ask for. So, and that's what we're here today to, on this podcast. We're just trying to do our part, moving that needle just a little bit closer to completely removing it and just making our lives a little bit healthier. So,
yeah, no doubt. No doubt.
Well, that's all I have for today. Tom, is there anything you wanted to add?
No, I can't think of anything. I think we kind of went through everything, soup to nuts on PFAS, and hopefully we didn't freak out a lot of people. But Awareness is better than ignorance when it comes to these things.
Absolutely.
So make sure you understand what you're getting yourself into, and just try to stay clean and safe out there for sure.
Yeah, no, that's a great set of words there. Well, that's a wrap for today's episode. I just want to thank everyone for joining us, wherever you're listening to this from. If you find this episode helpful, make sure to share this with others. Drop a like.
Yeah, please. What is it? Smash the like button.
Yep, there it is.
And
I was waiting for it.
What's the other one? Sign up? I can't remember.
It was like, it's subscribe, smash the like button and smash the subscribe button.
Yeah, smash the like and subscribe. That's what it is. That's what we need. Subscribers and likers. Yeah, you're our favorites. And again, any comments or questions or things that we got wrong, there's a disclaimer underneath every podcast, but throw it in the comments. Let us know how we can get better. Throw some suggestions on future episodes. We love your feedback. We want to make sure we're catering the content to what you guys want to hear and what you want to learn about. So we'll do our research on, tried and true things like Wikipedia and Google. They would never lie to us.
Yeah, right. They're the most valid location to go to for anything in this world.
Best reference source ever.
Yeah. Should I dye my hair?
Yes.
Well, stay safe out there. We'll see you guys next time.
All right. Take care, guys. Thank you so much.